Hi everybody out there, thanks again for joining us here at Canyon Hobbies. We appreciate you being with us. Today we're going to do a really common repair that we get here at this store. It's an easy repair, but I think a lot of times people, again, are just kind of afraid to do it. So I want you guys to know how to do it and do it easily and quick. As you can see, I have an Arrma. This is the Senton. I'm missing the ESC because I just kind of took it out so it would make it a little easier for you to see what we're doing today. What we're going to do is a motor replacement. The brushed motor that's in here, it tends not to last very long, and it'll burn out. Common things that'll happen is you'll be driving, you'll change your battery, and the car won't run again. You'll still be able to steer, but it won't run, and that's kind of what leads you to the motor needing to be replaced. So that's what we're going to do here today. It's super easy, so let's dive in. First off, there is a center drive shaft. On this is a four-wheel drive. If you have a two-wheel drive, you won't have to worry about this, but basically just take that center drive shaft out for now and get it out of the way. And then you'll notice there's this red piece of plastic here. That is basically just a retainer for the transmission. So what we'll do is we'll take that retainer out, and Arrma's made it real nice and easy. It's just one screw. The tools we'll be using today is a 2.0 metric and a 2.5. That's pretty much all you'll need. I always have a parts tray with me, Loctite and oil as we go along. If you need those things, it's nice to have. So we'll take this screw out, set that over here, and basically we just got to pull this little retainer out. Now that one came out easy because it's been cleaned, but sometimes as you're trying to get that out, it's going to be a little difficult. Dirt gets in there. We call it dirt glue, and it makes it pretty hard to get out. So sometimes you have to use some force, maybe even a pry, like a screwdriver, to pry it out. But once you get that out, that gives you the ability to pull the transmission out. Now on the transmission itself, it does have a tab that says pull. So we'll pull up on that and we'll wiggle it forward. We're pulling it towards the front of the car. And sometimes it's easier with the pry tool to get that to slide out. But with a little force, your transmission's out, and it'll all come out in one piece. And that's what we're going to be working on today. So go ahead and put the truck aside for a minute, and we'll get a good look at the transmission and the motor. As I drop my tool. And to get access to the motor, it's only 3 screws here. So we take these 3 screws out. And if you have a drill or tools like that, sometimes it makes these little things faster, but I don't mind the couple extra seconds it takes to use your hand. And plus, I know I'm not going to strip out the plastic. Sometimes with the drill, if you're not careful, you can strip out the plastic, which with RC cars, there's a lot of plastic involved. So just be patient, take it apart. Luckily it's only 3 screws. They are long, but there's only 3 of them, so we can handle that. Just get those screws out, just pull this cover off. So I'll set that aside. Now you can see we have access to the transmission. Inside the transmission you have your spur gear with your slipper clutch. And that's all an assembly, so you can just take that out. And then you have your motor with your pinion. This is the pinion, this is your spur gear. Just take the motor out, 2 screws, and just kind of remember how you're taking things apart. And as we reassemble this, there's some important steps that we need to take to make it run nice. So, those screws out, the motor is out. Just a matter of getting a new motor, replacing the pinion onto the new motor. Take note of your pinion placement. You'll see on this one it's pretty much flush with the motor shaft. So if you use an Arrma motor to replace it with, put it in that same position. That way you don't have to try to adjust it when it's in the transmission. I like to change it out with a different motor or upgrade it to a brushless, which is pretty common, to go from a brush motor, which you know it's brushed because it's got 2 wires and it's got brushes in here. Brushless motors will have 3 wires, which in a case like this, the nice thing is Arrma does make an upgrade kit that'll come with a brushless motor, brushless ESC, and a transmission that's the 3S transmission. The main difference between that and this transmission is it'll have a metal aluminum piece here, which will help with keeping it cool and also give it strength. So that's actually a really good upgrade. We'll put a link in the post so you can see that. It's a great kit to upgrade to. If you're thinking of upgrading at this point, this is a good time to do it. Another thing I recommend when you get your car apart, anytime you do, let's clean things up. Run it through the dishwasher, get out your toothbrush, clean everything up, make sure it's all nice and clean so it goes back together easier, and it also helps it last longer. So with the motor out, we're to the point where we put a new motor in. We're just going to put this motor back in. The main thing I want to show you is when you get your motor back in, you're going to have to set what's called the mesh. The mesh is basically these 2 gears meeting up. You don't want them too tight because that'll create heat and also friction and ends up ruining this gear and potentially ruin your motor too. And then you don't want it too far away because then it'll strip this gear out or not even engage that gear. So there's a specific way to mesh your gears, which is simple, but it's something to pay attention to as you're putting things together. So start by putting in our spur gear. I like to do that. You don't necessarily need to put that in first, but as we put it together, we want that in there to set our mesh. So start your screws. We don't want to tighten these all the way down, but get them started and start them pretty good. Tighten them up a little bit so that the motor is you'll still able to move it, but it's not flopping all over. So I kind of tighten it down where the motor's somewhat tight, but then I can still move it around because that's how you're going to set your mesh, is moving this motor around. So as you can see, in this transmission, it's got an adjustment. You can move your motor all the way out there, you can move it all the way forward. Most people, when they're trying to explain setting a mesh, they'll say, pretend there's a piece of paper in there that creates a gap between your spur gear and your pinion. So that's what I kind of do, is I pretend if I was putting this together, I'm going to bring it out to where there's just a piece of paper of a gap in there. And again, remember, if it's too far out, you're going to strip your gear. If it's too far in, you're going to burn things up. So just a little bit out. And once I get it tightened, I'll check it after too. So I tighten one screw. The motor can't move now, but then I can test. And what you kind of feel for is a little bit of a knock in your spur gear. You can see my spur gear is moving just a tiny bit, but my pinion is not. That mesh feels good, and that's kind of where you want it to be. So we can put this back together after we finish tightening the motor. So we'll get this back together, and then you're on your way to having a new motor. It's just that easy. Definitely not something to be afraid about, especially you young ones out there. This is a fun, easy repair. Get a new motor in there, get driving again. And sometimes a good practice once you get this cover on, kind of tighten down, feel that mesh again. Just make sure that mesh stayed where you want it. It didn't move at all. This one feels good, so we'll keep it there. So I don't have to take it apart again, which is nice. All right, so you got the transmission back together, and we can click it back into the car. Bring the car back out. Now this does take a little bit sometimes. Sometimes you'll push it and it'll go right back in. Other times those splines on the rear diff and the transmission, they got to meet up, right? So as you're pushing it in, if you get stuck, turn this a little bit as you're pushing it back, and eventually you'll get those splines to meet up. And when you do, you just give it some brute force and it'll go in. And then you hear that click, you got it. So we're back in there, and then this should be easy too, especially if you went through and took your time and cleaned it up, which I always recommend. You want to keep your, if you don't clean your car, this is a good time to clean it when you're doing repairs. So we click that back in, one screw, and it's all back together solid. And you can put your driveline back in. Again, just try to mesh up this spline, push it on the front. There you go. Just make sure everything spins nice, and your armor's back together, ready to rip again. Thanks again for joining us this repair of Arrma Senton. We'll see you next time.